everyone! Ready to get our hands dirty with some habit building. You know that feeling, right? Self-improvement advice coming at us from all sides, but actually like putting it all together and doing it? That's the real challenge.
For sure.
So today, we are taking a deep dive into a YouTube summary of Atomic Habits.
Yes.
But with a little twist, we're going to try to use your goals and experiences to make it as actionable as possible for you, the listener.
Yeah, I think that's what's really cool about these deep dives that we do. James Clear makes a great point in Atomic Habits about how we often want to go for those big dramatic changes.
Right.
But, real transformation really happens from those tiny little actions that we take consistently.
It's like that analogy he uses in the video, that plane taking off from New York, headed for Los Angeles.
Right.
And just like a tiny 3-degree course correction, and all of a sudden, boom, you're landing in Tijuana.
Oh, yeah.
It's insane. Small tweaks, but big, big differences in the long run. Like it's that 1% better each day that really adds up.
Exactly. And that 1% might not seem like a lot like at first glance, but like the video shows how that compounds to almost 38 times improvement over the year.
Wow.
So it's not about, overnight success. It's about those small wins that accumulate. What's like a goal that you're working towards right now?
Let's see. Your Nemitz mentioned that you wanting to write more consistently. So
Yeah.
imagine taking that 1% principle and applying it to your writing.
Right.
Even if it's like a few sentences a day, it's all going to add up.
It all adds up. And that kind of brings us to one of the big ideas from the video about focusing on systems over goals.
Okay.
It's easy to get caught up in that end goal, like having a published book.
Yeah.
But what Clear argues is that, the real key is building the system, the daily habit of writing. And I noticed that you mentioned in your sources that you sometimes struggle to find the time to write regularly. Does that resonate at all with you?
Oh, absolutely. And like that whole valley of disappointment the video talks about.
Yes.
It's so real. Like you're putting in the work, but you're not seeing those results immediately. And it can be very, very demotivating.
And that's where I think that shift from goals to systems is so powerful. Because, instead of you being focused on that far-off goal of a finished manuscript, it's like you're showing up every day and writing, regardless of, how much you produce.
Right.
It's about becoming a writer, not just trying to write a book.
Okay, yeah.
Does that shift in perspective at all feel helpful to you in your situation?
Oh, it makes so much sense. It takes the pressure off of that outcome and puts the focus on the process. Okay, so we've got this idea of building systems for our habits. But how do we actually make them stick? The video breaks down this concept of a habit loop, this cue, craving, response, reward. What stood out to you about that whole habit loop?
I think what's really cool about the habit loop is just how relatable the example is in the video. So think about a time when you were working and your mind went blank, and then you found yourself scrolling on social media. That blank mind, that was the cue.
Oh, okay.
The craving was for a break.
Okay.
The response was checking social media,
Okay.
and the reward was that hit of distraction.
Right.
And we all have these loops that are playing out in our lives constantly.
Right. And I think the real key is to just become more aware of our own loops, both the good and the bad. I notice you have some notes here where you've actually kind of like map out some of your own patterns. Want to walk us through a few of those?
Yeah, absolutely. The more aware we are of those cues, the better that we can manipulate them to our advantage.
Right.
Remember, Claire's first law, make it obvious. So if you want to drink more water, having a full water bottle right there on your desk, it becomes this visual cue that you can't ignore.
Oh, I love that.
Right.
It's like setting yourself up for success before you even start.
Exactly.
The video also talks about using implementation intentions, which is basically kind of like pre-planning your habit and getting really specific with it.
Yeah.
Like, I will write for 30 minutes at 7 a.m. in my home office.
Right.
Does that strategy seem like it would work for you based on your other notes here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having that concrete plan, with the time, the location, the action all spelled out, it really removes all of the guesswork.
Right.
And makes it so much harder to, talk yourself out of it.
Yeah.
And speaking of making things hard, let's talk about dopamine.
Oh, yes. The video explains how dopamine, the motivation molecule, plays a huge role in habit formation.
Right.
And it's not just the reward itself, it's the anticipation of the reward that really gets us hooked.
Exactly. And that's why those tempting habits, like standing on junk food or endlessly scrolling social media, are so hard to break.
Yeah.
But here's where things get interesting. Clear suggests a strategy called temptation bundling,
Okay.
which is basically pairing something that you need to do with something that you want to do.
Ooh, like listening to your favorite podcast only when you're working on that pile of paperwork.
Yeah.
I've tried that, and it's actually really effective. What are some ways that you could use temptation bundling to make some of those must-do tasks a bit more enjoyable?
That's a good question. Let's explore that further and dive a little deeper into how we can make habits easy and maybe even a little fun.
Okay, so temptation bundling, that sounds like a fun way to trick ourselves into doing those things we don't want to do, but sometimes even bundling our favorite things isn't enough. What happens when willpower alone just isn't cutting it?
Well, in those cases, I think Clear's law of least effort really comes into play. It's all about making the habit that you want to build as frictionless as possible.
Okay.
So the easier it is to do something, the more likely you are to actually do it. It reminds me of that study you mentioned in your notes about habit formation,
Uh-huh.
it being more about repetition than time. So the more you repeat an action, the more automatic it becomes.
Right. That makes sense. I'm all about those shortcuts. And it's not even about being lazy, it's about being strategic with your energy. What are some ways that we can reduce that friction, especially for those of us who struggle with getting started?
Well, the video offers some pretty practical tips. Like, for example, if you want to start working out in the morning, laying out your workout clothes the night before.
Oh, yeah.
That eliminates that decision fatigue when you're half asleep.
Oh, for sure.
Or if you're trying to be more productive, having a dedicated workspace. So you're not wasting time clearing clutter before you can actually even sit down and focus.
I love that idea of a dedicated workspace. It's like giving your good habits their own little home.
Exactly.
It minimizes those excuses, like, oh, I'll just tidy up first and then I'll get started.
Exactly. And when it comes to overcoming procrastination, Clear suggests another really helpful tool, the 2-minute rule.
Okay.
And it sounds almost too simple to be true, but it's all about breaking down any daunting task into this ridiculously easy 2-minute starting point.
Okay.
So if you're dreaming of writing a novel, just commit to writing one sentence.
Right.
If you want to run a marathon, just put on your shoes. The idea is just to build a little momentum.
You're speaking my language. I love those small wins. And once you actually get going, it's so much easier to just keep going. But what about, on the flip side, what about breaking those bad habits?
Well, the principle kind of applies in reverse. To break a bad habit, you want to increase the friction. Make it as inconvenient as possible. So if you're trying to cut back on watching TV, unplug it after every use and put the remote in a drawer.
Oh, okay.
Or if mindless snacking is your downfall, move those tempting treats to a really hard to reach shelf.
It's like building all these tiny little obstacles to make those bad habits less appealing. So we've talked about making habits obvious, attractive, and easy, but there's still one more piece to this puzzle, right? Satisfaction.
Right, this is where we tap into the power of reward. Clear reminds us that our brains are literally wired to repeat actions that feel good.
Okay.
So we need to make sure that those good habits aren't just beneficial, they're actually enjoyable too.
So how do we do that? Besides the obvious, choosing activities that we genuinely enjoy, what are some ways that we can bust that satisfaction factor?
Well, the video mentions visual progress trackers as a great way to make those small wins more tangible and more satisfying. It could be as simple as moving paper clips from one jar to another as you complete tasks, or using a habit tracker app to kind of visually see your progress.
I love those visual cues. It's like celebrating those small wins.
Yeah.
But sometimes, we need that extra little push. What about the role of accountability?
Oh, accountability can be so powerful, especially for habits that don't give you that immediate gratification. Having an accountability partner, someone you check in with regularly, can really help to keep you motivated.
It's funny how sometimes we're more afraid of disappointing other people than we are of disappointing ourselves.
That's true. And there's nothing wrong with using that to your advantage. We could even create our own habit contracts, where you set consequences for yourself if you slip up.
Okay.
The video shares this great example where this guy makes a deal with his partner to pay her $10 every time that she catches him scrolling on social media during work hours.
Wow. That's commitment. But let's face it, we're all human and we're all going to stumble. Life happens, we get stressed, we break the chain. How do we handle those setbacks?
Well, I think, first of all, it's so important to remember that setbacks are a normal part of the process.
Right.
They don't mean that we've failed.
Right.
Clear's never miss twice rule is a great mantra, I think,
Okay.
for navigating those slip-ups.
Okay, I like that one.
So if you miss a day, Don't beat yourself up about it. Just make sure that you don't miss 2 days in a row. It's about maintaining consistency, not perfection.
Oh, that's a game changer. It really takes the pressure off, you know? Knowing that one slip up isn't going to derail everything. But what about those days where you're just completely drained and you just don't feel like doing anything?
Even on those days, just like showing up in a small way can make a huge difference. Just put on your workout clothes, even if you only end up stretching for 5 minutes.
Right.
Open that book, even if you only read a paragraph. Just like the act of showing up, I think, keeps that habit loop alive.
Right.
And it prevents those small slip-ups from turning into, like, major derailments.
It's those tiny little acts of consistency that add up over time. But it's not just about the actions, is it? It's about the mindset behind them.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to that idea of identity that we were talking about earlier. It's about becoming the type of person who embodies those habits.
Right.
So instead of saying, I'm trying to eat healthier,
Right.
you say, I am a healthy eater.
That's such a powerful shift. It's about aligning your actions with your self-image and making those positive choices just a part of who you are. It's that self-fulfilling prophecy where your actions are reinforcing your beliefs about yourself. We've covered so much in this deep dive, from like the science behind how habits form to those little practical tips that can make those positive changes actually stick. But before we wrap up, what are some key takeaways that you want our listener to walk away with?
I think one of the most important messages is that, building better habits isn't about finding some magical formula or like some overnight transformation.
Right.
It's about embracing those small 1% changes and applying them consistently over time.
Yes.
And just being kind to yourself along the way, knowing that setbacks are inevitable and it's the long game that really matters.
So true. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. Lean on your support system, find your accountability buddies, celebrate those small wins, and just keep that big picture in mind.
Now let's take all of this and apply it to your specific situation. I have a few ideas.
You know, it's amazing how those small, consistent actions can have such a big impact on our lives.
Yeah.
Like Claire says, success is the product of daily habits, not once-in-a-lifetime transformations.
Yeah, that really is the heart of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not about like chasing some elusive quick fix. It's really about putting in the work day after day and trusting that all those tiny improvements will compound over time.
And I think what's so powerful about Claire's approach is it makes it feel manageable.
Right.
You know, like even for people who have struggled with this in the past.
Yeah.
It's not about overwhelming ourselves with these like unrealistic expectations. It's about finding those strategies that work.
Absolutely.
So I know you're a very visual person.
Yeah.
And I saw in your notes that you've tried a bunch of different habit tracking methods.
Hey.
Have you had any luck with those?
I've had some hits and misses.
Yeah.
Some of them were just way too complicated.
Right.
And others were too simple. And they just didn't really keep me engaged.
Yeah, it sounds like finding that balance is going to be key for you.
Yeah.
One that's visually appealing and functional.
Right.
What if we like brainstormed a couple ideas together
Okay.
based on what works for you?
Let's do it.
So it seems like you're trying to build a few habits, like writing, consistently getting some exercise and drinking more water.
Right.
What if we designed a visual tracker that combined all three?
Okay. Yeah.
We could make a chart with checkboxes, you know, for each day.
Uh-huh.
And to make it even more fun, we could add something visual, like a plant.
Oh, I like that.
That grows as you check things off.
So like a virtual garden that flourishes as you nourish your good habits.
Exactly. It's so visual and so cute. And we could even add in rewards.
Oh, you
Like
can.
every time you fill up a week on the tracker, you treat yourself to something you enjoy,
I love that.
like a new book or a long bath. It's all about celebrating those wins, you know?
For sure.
Making the journey just as fun as the destination.
Exactly. And the best part is it's totally customizable. You can experiment with different trackers and rewards and strategies
Right.
and just find what really works for you. It's like your own habit change toolkit.
I love that. So we've covered so much,
We have.
from how habits form to those practical tips to actually make it happen.
Yeah.
But before we go, I want to touch on one of the biggest things we talked about.
Yeah.
Shifting your identity.
Yes.
This is so important. It's not just about doing the habit. It's about becoming the type of person who does that habit.
Absolutely. It's about aligning your actions with how you see yourself.
Right.
So instead of saying, I'm trying to be a writer, you say, I am a writer.
That's so powerful. It's like you owning those choices and making them a part of who you are.
Exactly. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You believe it, so you become it.
And the more you act like that, the stronger that belief gets.
Right.
It's like this positive feedback loop. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Atomic Habits, I want to leave you with this. You have the power to create the life you want, one small habit at a time.
Yeah.
Embrace those tiny changes. Celebrate how far you've come, and never forget you are capable of becoming the best version of yourself.
It's a journey, not a race. Be patient with yourself, experiment, and most importantly, have fun with it. The Quartz.